"Ma'am, if you don't step out right now, this will get a lot worse," the officer said, his voice flat, practiced, like he had said it 100 times before and expected it to work the same way again. And for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath under the flashing red and blue lights that painted the quiet suburban street in sharp, restless colors. Danielle Brooks sat behind the wheel with both hands visible, fingers slightly trembling against the steering wheel, her son asleep in the back seat just seconds ago, now stirring. Confused by the sudden flood of light and noise, the clock on the dashboard read 9:42 p.m., a late drive home after a double shift that had stretched her body thin but never touched the calm she carried for her child. She turned her head slightly, enough to check on him, his small face half lit by the pulsing lights, his eyes blinking open, searching for her. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice soft, unsure, and something in her chest tightened but did not break. "Not here. Not now." She lowered the window slowly, the cool night air slipping into the car, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic and the heavier presence of authority standing just outside her door. The officer stepped closer, one hand resting near his belt, posture rigid, gaze fixed. "License and registration," he said, not asking, not greeting, just stating. Danielle nodded once, her movements careful, deliberate, as if every inch mattered, as if the space between her hands and the glove compartment carried weight. "My son is in the back seat," she said gently, her voice steady, not defiant, not submissive, just clear. The officer's eyes flicked past her shoulder for half a second before returning to her face, unreadable. Another cruiser pulled up behind the first, tires crunching softly against the pavement, doors opening, footsteps approaching, the quiet street no longer quiet. Neighbors' porch lights flickering on one by one like silent witnesses. Danielle handed over her documents, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper just long enough to feel grounded, to remind herself she was still in control of something. The officer barely glanced at them before speaking again. "Step out of the vehicle," this time sharper, closer, and in the back seat her son shifted, his small hand gripping the fabric of his hoodie. "Mom, are we in trouble?" he asked, his voice rising just enough to carry. Danielle closed her eyes for a brief second, just one breath, in and out, then opened them again, steady, present. "No, baby," she said softly, meeting his eyes through the mirror. "We're okay, but outside." The air felt anything but okay. The second officer moved to the passenger side, shining a flashlight through the glass, the beam cutting across the interior, across her face, across her child. And in that moment Danielle understood something deeper than fear, something older, heavier, the quiet knowledge of being seen without being understood, judged before being heard. She reached for the door handle slowly, carefully, the metal cool beneath her fingers. And as she stepped out into the wash of flashing lights and watching eyes, the night seemed to narrow around her, closing in not with sound, but with expectation, as if everything that would happen next had already been decided, and she was the only one who hadn't been told. The night air felt colder once she stood outside the car, not because of the temperature, but because of the silence between every word that was not being said. Danielle kept her hands visible at waist level, fingers relaxed, shoulders steady, her posture calm in a way that came from years of choosing peace, even when peace was not offered back. The officer took a step closer, close enough that the reflection of the flashing lights danced across his badge, his expression unchanged, unreadable. "Do you know why you were stopped tonight?" he asked, and it sounded less like a question and more like a formality. Danielle shook her head slowly. "No, sir," she answered, her voice even, respectful, but grounded. Behind her the soft sound of her son shifting in the backseat cut through everything else, a small voice trying to understand a moment too big for him. "Mom, I am scared," he said, and this time she turned her head just enough to meet his eyes through the open door, her gaze softening instantly. "I am right here," she said, each word placed carefully, like something she wanted him to hold on to. The second officer circled the vehicle, flashlight beam tracing along the windows, across the seats, lingering a second too long on the back where her son sat, then moving again, slow, deliberate. Danielle noticed everything. The pacing, the tone, the way the first officer did not look at her when she spoke, but only when she paused. Measuring silence instead of listening to words. "Step over here," he said, gesturing toward the front of the cruiser. Danielle obeyed without hesitation, her steps measured, each one steady against the pavement, the gravel crunching softly beneath her shoes, the street around them now fully awake, porch lights glowing, silhouettes behind curtains watching without stepping outside, the kind of distance that felt familiar, present but uninvolved. The officer placed her license against the hood of the car, flattening it with his palm. "This area has had reports," he began, then paused, as if choosing which version of the explanation to give. Danielle listened without interrupting, her face calm, her breathing controlled, but inside there was a quiet awareness growing. Not panic, not fear, just recognition. The same pattern she had seen before, the same tone that carried assumption before evidence. "Reports of what?" she asked gently, not challenging, just asking. The officer's jaw tightened slightly, not at the words, but at the fact that she had spoken them. "Suspicious activity," he replied, and the words hung in the air, vague, undefined, yet somehow already pointed. Danielle nodded once, slow, thoughtful, as if processing something larger than the moment itself. Behind her, her son's door opened slightly, a small foot stepping down onto the pavement. "Mom?" he called again, louder now. Unable to stay still any longer, Danielle turned immediately, her entire presence shifting toward him. "Stay right there, baby," she said softly, but he had already taken another step, drawn not by curiosity but by the need to be close to her. The second officer moved instinctively, raising a hand as if to guide him back, but the movement was too quick, too unfamiliar, and the child froze, uncertainty flashing across his face. Danielle's voice came again, calmer, deeper this time. "It is okay, just stand by the door." And he listened, because her voice had always been the one thing in his world that made sense. The officers exchanged a brief glance, something unspoken passing between them, the kind of communication built on habit rather than clarity. Danielle watched that moment carefully, reading it not with suspicion but with awareness, and in that quiet space between actions she understood something was shifting, not outwardly, not yet, but underneath, in the rhythm of the scene, in the way the questions no longer sounded like questions, and for the first time since the lights appeared behind her car, she felt the weight of the moment settle fully into place, not as chaos, but as something controlled by forces that had already decided how this would go, unless something changed. The air shifted in a way that could not be seen but could be felt, like a quiet pressure building beneath the surface of something that had not yet broken. Danielle stood still near the front of the cruiser, her eyes moving once from her son to the officers and back again, measuring distance, tone, intention. The first officer picked up her license again, turning it slightly under the flashing lights as if it might reveal something new the second time. "You live about 15 miles from here," he said, not looking at her, his voice carrying that same steady certainty. Danielle nodded once. "Yes, sir. I just got off work," she replied, her voice calm, her words simple. But the officer did not respond immediately. Instead, he glanced toward his partner, then back at her, the kind of glance that did not ask a question but confirmed a thought. "Step a little farther away from the vehicle," he added, gesturing with 2 fingers. Danielle took a step back, then another, creating space not because she was told to, but because she understood the rhythm of the moment, understood that resistance here would not be read as dignity, but as defiance. Her son stood by the open door, small hands gripping the edge, his eyes wide, following every movement like he was trying to learn something no child should have to learn. The second officer crouched slightly near the passenger side, shining the flashlight again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if searching for something that had not been there before. The beam moved across the seats, the floor, the glove compartment now closed, then paused on the rearview mirror where a small photo hung. Danielle and her son smiling in daylight. A different world. The officer straightened, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, have you had anything to drink tonight?" the first officer asked suddenly, the question landing out of place, disconnected from everything that had come before. Danielle blinked once, not in confusion but in recognition of the shift. "No, sir," she answered, steady. The officer nodded slowly, as if the answer had already been accounted for. The street remained still around them, No one stepping forward, no one calling out. Just the quiet hum of observation from behind closed doors. Danielle's breathing remained even, controlled, each inhale measured, each exhale grounding. But inside her thoughts were aligning, connecting small details into a larger picture. The extra cruiser, the repeated instructions, the questions that circled without landing. This was no longer about a simple stop, not about a turn signal or a speed limit. It had become something else, something less defined but more serious in tone. Her son shifted again, taking one cautious step closer to her. "Mom, can I come to you?" he asked, his voice softer now, as if he had learned to lower it without being told. Danielle's eyes softened instantly. "Stay right there. Baby, I can see you," she said, her voice warm, steady, a contrast to everything else in the scene. The officer followed her gaze, watching the child for a brief moment before looking back at her, and for the first time there was a flicker of something in his expression, not understanding, not empathy, just a pause, a moment where the certainty seemed to hesitate. Danielle noticed it, held it for a second, then let it pass, because she knew better than to build hope on a glance. The second officer returned to the front, whispering something low. Words Danielle could not hear but could feel in the shift of posture, in the tightening of shoulders. The first officer nodded once, then looked at her again, this time longer, more direct, as if reassessing something he had already decided. "We are going to run a few checks," he said finally, his tone firm. "Final." Danielle nodded once more, not because she agreed, but because she understood the moment had moved beyond her control, and as the silence stretched again between instructions and action, she felt it clearly now, the sense that whatever came next would not come from what she said, but from what they believed. The waiting stretched longer than it should have, not measured by minutes, but by the way the silence thickened between every small movement. Danielle stood where she had been told, hands still visible, shoulders relaxed, her eyes occasionally drifting to her son and then back to the officers, never lingering too long in one place, as if balance itself depended on it. The first officer leaned slightly against the hood of the cruiser, his radio clipped to his shoulder, crackling softly with distant chatter that did not belong to this street, did not belong to this moment. He spoke into it briefly, codes and clipped phrases that sounded routine, but felt anything but routine in the quiet neighborhood. The second officer stepped away from the vehicle and circled back, slower this time, no longer searching, just observing, his gaze moving from Danielle to the child and back again, taking in details that did not fit whatever expectation had brought them here. Danielle noticed the shift in pace, the subtle change in posture, the way certainty had turned into something more cautious, more deliberate. She breathed in slowly, letting the cool air settle her, grounding herself in something she could control, even if it was only the rhythm of her breath. Her son remained by the open door, smaller now in the wide space of the street, his eyes fixed on her, waiting for something to change, waiting for her signal that everything was still okay. Danielle gave him a small nod, barely noticeable, but enough, because he understood her in ways the officers did not. The first officer stepped forward again, holding her license between his fingers. "Dispatch is taking a little longer tonight," he said, though she had not asked, his tone less sharp than before, less certain. Danielle nodded once. "It is a busy night," she replied quietly, not offering more, not filling the space unnecessarily. The officer studied her for a moment, longer than before, as if trying to place something that did not match the image he had formed earlier. The streetlights hummed softly overhead, casting a steady glow that contrasted with the intermittent flash of red and blue. The two lights competing, one constant, one disruptive. Danielle stood in between them, neither fully in one nor the other, her presence calm but not passive, present but not confrontational. The second officer shifted his weight, glancing again toward the houses, toward the silhouettes that had not moved, then back to Danielle. "How long have you lived in this area?" he asked, his voice quieter, less authoritative. Danielle turned slightly toward him, acknowledging the question. "About 3 years," she answered, her tone even, the kind of answer that carried no defense, no explanation, just fact. The officer nodded slowly, as if that detail mattered in a way he could not yet explain. The first officer's radio crackled again, louder this time, pulling his attention away. He turned slightly, listening, his posture tightening for a brief second, then loosening again. Whatever he heard did not resolve the moment. It only extended it. Danielle watched that reaction closely, the small tightening, the release, the uncertainty, and in that quiet observation she understood that whatever they were waiting for was not giving them the clarity they expected. Her son shifted again, stepping 1 inch closer to the edge of the door, his voice softer now. Almost a whisper. "Mom, can we go home?" Danielle felt the weight of that question settle deeper than anything else that had been said. She turned her head, meeting his eyes fully this time, and for a second the rest of the world faded, the lights, the officers, the watching windows, all of it. "We will," she said gently, her voice steady. Certain, even if the moment around her was not. And as she turned back toward the officers, she felt something inside her settle into place. Not fear, not anger, but a quiet decision, a line she would not cross, a calm she would not lose. And though the night remained unchanged on the surface, something within it had shifted, something subtle but real, like the first sign of a storm changing direction before anyone else noticed. The silence did not break. It tightened, like something pulling inward rather than releasing. Danielle felt it in the way the officers no longer spoke as quickly, in the way their movements became more deliberate, less certain. The first officer looked down at the small screen in his hand, then back at her, then again at the screen, as if the information he expected to see had not arrived in the form he trusted. "Can you confirm your address again?" he asked, his tone controlled but no longer as firm. Danielle repeated it calmly, each word clear, unhurried, as if she had nothing to prove but everything to hold steady. The second officer shifted closer to the cruiser, his gaze drifting toward the child again, not searching now, just watching, as if trying to understand a picture that no longer fit the frame he had started with. The radio crackled once more, louder this time, and the first officer turned slightly away, listening, his posture tightening just enough to signal that whatever came through mattered. Danielle did not move, but her attention sharpened, the kind of focus that comes when you realize the moment is about to change direction. Her son took another small step, closing the distance between them by inches, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I do not like this." And Danielle felt that sentence land deeper than anything the officers had said. She turned her head, her expression softening immediately. "I know, baby," she said gently. "Just stay right there. You are doing so good." Her voice carried warmth, reassurance, something steady in a space that had none. The first officer lowered his hand from the radio slowly, his eyes no longer avoiding hers. There was something different now. Not apology, not yet, but awareness, the kind that arrives late and sits heavy. He glanced at his partner, a brief look that said more than words, then back at Danielle. "We are still verifying a few things," he said, but the sentence sounded thinner this time, less grounded. Danielle nodded once, not because she accepted it, but because she understood it no longer held the same weight. The street around them remained unchanged, porch lights still glowing, silhouettes still watching, but the energy had shifted, the tension no longer rising. Now it hovered, uncertain, like a question without an answer. Danielle's fingers curled slightly at her sides, not from fear, but from decision. Something quiet forming beneath the surface, something she had held back until now. Her eyes moved once more to her son, then back to the officers, measuring the space, the distance, the moment. She reached slowly into her jacket pocket, her movements careful, visible, controlled. The second officer noticed immediately, his posture adjusting, attention sharpening. "Ma'am, keep your hands where we can see them," he said, not harsh, but alert. Danielle paused, then gently brought her hand back into view, holding her phone loosely, screen dark, her voice calm, steady, grounded in something deeper than the moment. "I am just going to make a call," she said, not asking, not challenging, just stating. The first officer hesitated, just for a second, the kind of hesitation that reveals uncertainty more than refusal. Danielle watched that hesitation closely. Then, without rushing, without breaking eye contact, she unlocked the phone, her thumb moving with quiet precision. One contact, one name. Familiar, steady. Her son watched her, his breathing slowing, sensing something shifting even if he did not understand it. The officers did not speak. But they did not stop her either, and in that small space between action and reaction, something invisible but undeniable began to turn, like a door opening just enough to let a different outcome step through. The moment the call connected, Danielle did not speak right away. She simply held the phone to her ear, her eyes steady, her breathing even, as if the silence itself carried meaning. On the other end, a voice answered, low, composed, familiar in a way that did not need introduction. Danielle, he said, not asking, just recognizing. And something in her shoulders eased by a fraction, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her son to see, because he watched her the way children watch for safety. I need you, she said quietly, her voice calm but weighted, not with panic, but with certainty. She did not explain, she did not rush, she did not need to. There was a pause on the line, not confusion, not hesitation, just understanding forming in real time. Where are you? The voice replied, still steady, still controlled. Danielle gave the street name, the nearest intersection, each word clear, precise, the kind of clarity that comes from knowing it matters. The officers stood a few feet away, listening without appearing to listen, their posture unchanged but their attention sharpened. The first officer's gaze lingered on the phone longer than before, not because of what was said, but because of how it was said, the absence of fear, the absence of urgency, the quiet confidence that did not match the situation they believed they were controlling. Danielle lowered her voice slightly, not to hide, but to focus. We were pulled over, she added, the words simple, unembellished. The response on the other end came after a brief silence. Stay where you are. And it was not a suggestion, it was a statement, grounded, immovable. Danielle nodded once, even though he could not see her. I am, she replied, then ended the call without another word. She lowered the phone slowly, her hand returning to her side, her posture unchanged, but something around her felt different, not louder, not visible, just altered, like the air itself had shifted direction. Her son looked at her, searching her face for answers, for signals, and this time when she met his eyes, there was something new there, not just calm, but assurance. It is okay, she said softly, and for the first time since the lights appeared behind them, he believed it. The officers exchanged another glance, shorter this time, sharper, the kind that carried a question neither of them wanted to ask out loud. The first officer cleared his throat slightly, stepping forward. Who did you call? He asked, his tone measured, but no longer as controlled as before. Danielle looked at him, not defensive, not confrontational, just present. Family, she answered, the word simple, but it landed differently than expected. The second officer shifted his weight, glancing briefly down the street, as if expecting something to appear, though nothing had yet. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, but this time neither of them reached for it immediately. Their attention divided now between what they could see and what they could not. Danielle stood still, her presence unchanged, her breathing steady, her gaze calm, and in the quiet that followed, something settled into place. Not resolution, not yet, but a shift in balance, subtle but undeniable, the kind that happens when a moment stops belonging to one side alone. The street remained the same, the lights still flashing, the houses still watching, but beneath it all, something had begun to move, something unseen but approaching, and even before it arrived, it could already be felt. The street did not change, but the feeling did, subtle at first, like a shift in air pressure before a storm. The officers stood where they were, yet their stillness was no longer the same. It carried attention now, anticipation, the kind that listens beyond what is visible. Danielle remained calm, her posture unchanged, her presence steady in a way that did not demand control, but quietly held it. Her son stood close to the car door, his small hands resting against the frame, his eyes moving between his mother and the officers, reading the moment the only way he knew how. Through her, the first officer glanced down the road again, then at his partner, then back at Danielle, the rhythm of his movements no longer automatic, now measured, aware, the silence stretched, not empty, but full, holding something just beyond reach. Then it came, not loud, not sudden, just the low hum of an engine approaching from the far end of the street, different from the patrol cars, deeper, steadier. The kind of sound that did not rush because it did not need to. The second officer turned his head first, eyes narrowing slightly, trying to place what he was hearing. The first officer followed a second later, both of them now looking in the same direction. The headlights appeared slowly, cutting through the darkness without urgency, not flashing, not announcing, just arriving. The vehicle moved at a controlled pace, not speeding, not hesitating, as if the destination was already certain. Danielle did not turn immediately. She felt it before. She saw it, the way the moment shifted around her, the way the officer's posture changed without command, shoulders tightening, stance adjusting, attention pulling outward instead of inward. Her son noticed it too, his voice softer now, almost curious. "Mom, who is that?" Danielle exhaled slowly, a breath she had been holding without realizing, then turned her head just enough to see the approaching lights. Her expression remained calm, but there was something deeper now, something settled. The vehicle came to a stop a short distance away, engine idling low, the headlights dimmed slightly, not aggressive, not cautious, just present. The driver's door opened with a quiet, controlled motion, no rush, no hesitation. Boots met the pavement with a steady, grounded sound, one step, then another, measured, deliberate. The figure that emerged was composed, upright, carrying a presence that did not need volume to be understood. The officers straightened almost instinctively, not ordered, not commanded, just responding to something they recognized without needing explanation. The first officer took a half step forward, then stopped, as if reconsidering the distance. The second officer adjusted his stance, his gaze fixed now, no longer searching, but assessing. Danielle watched quietly, her eyes following the figure as he moved closer, not fast, not slow, just certain. The street seemed to narrow around that movement, every detail sharper, every sound quieter, the houses, the lights, the watching silhouettes, all fading into the background of a moment that had shifted its center. The man approached until he stood just within the edge of the flashing lights, the red and blue reflecting across his face without changing it. His gaze moved once, taking in the scene, the officers, the child, then settled on Danielle. And in that single look, recognition passed between them, not spoken, not shown, just understood. The first officer cleared his throat again, but no words came, because for the first time that night, he was not the one controlling the moment, and everyone there could feel it, even before a single word was spoken. The silence held for a fraction longer than expected, as if even the air needed a moment to adjust to the shift. The man stepped fully into the light, his posture straight but unforced, his presence steady in a way that did not ask for attention yet commanded it. His eyes moved once more across the scene, taking in the details with quiet precision. The officers, the child, the open car door, then resting again on Danielle. And when he spoke, his voice was low, controlled, not raised, not sharp, but clear enough to cut through everything else. "Danielle," he said, and her name sounded different in that space. Grounded, certain. She nodded once, her shoulders easing just slightly. Her son looked up at the man, curiosity replacing fear in small, careful steps. The first officer stepped forward, attempting to reclaim structure. "Sir, this is an active stop," he began, his tone measured but no longer fully confident. The man turned his gaze toward him, not quickly, not abruptly, just enough, and that single look carried more weight than the words that followed. "I understand," he replied calmly, his hands visible, relaxed at his sides. "And I would like to understand what you believe is happening here." The phrasing was simple, but the effect was immediate. The officer paused, just for a second, as if recalibrating. "We received reports of suspicious activity in the area," he answered, repeating the earlier explanation. But now the words sounded thinner, less anchored. The man nodded slightly, acknowledging the statement without accepting it. His attention shifted briefly toward Danielle's son, his expression softening for a fraction of a moment, then returning to the officers. "And what specifically did you observe that connected her to those reports?" he asked, still calm, still measured. The question hung in the air, not aggressive, not accusatory, just precise. The second officer shifted his stance, his eyes flicking toward his partner before returning to the man. "She was driving slowly through the neighborhood," he offered, the sentence trailing slightly at the end. The man nodded again, absorbing the answer. At approximately 10 miles per hour on a residential street, with posted speed limits of 25 miles per hour, he clarified, not correcting, just reframing. The first officer's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. The man reached slowly into his jacket, his movements deliberate, visible, controlled. He retrieved a small leather case and opened it just enough for the badge inside to catch the light. Not held out, not presented dramatically, just there, undeniable. The reflection of the red and blue lights danced across its surface. The officer's posture shifted immediately. Not exaggerated, but unmistakable, shoulders straightening, attention sharpening. The first officer's voice changed when he spoke again. Quieter, more measured. "Sir," he said, the word carrying a different weight now. The man closed the case and returned it to his pocket with the same calm precision. "I am not here to interfere," he continued, his tone even. "I am here to ensure that what is happening is based on facts, not assumptions." The sentence settled into the space between them, firm, without force. The second officer glanced once more at Danielle, then at the child, then back at the man, something in his expression shifting, not fully, but enough. The first officer looked down briefly at the license still resting on the hood, then back up, his voice lower now. "We are still waiting on confirmation," he said, but the certainty that had been there earlier was gone, replaced by something closer to caution. The man nodded once, accepting the statement, then turned slightly toward Danielle, his voice softer when he spoke again. "You are all right," he said, not asking, just confirming. Danielle met his gaze, her expression steady. "Yes," she replied quietly, and in that exchange, brief and simple, the balance of the moment shifted completely, not through force, not through volume, but through presence, clarity, and the quiet insistence on truth. The weight of the moment did not disappear. It transformed, settling into something quieter, more precise, as if every movement now carried intention instead of assumption. The first officer reached slowly for the license resting on the hood. His fingers no longer rushed, no longer certain. He looked at it once more, then stepped forward and extended it back to Danielle, his voice lower than before, measured. "You are free to go," he said, the words simple, but different now. Danielle accepted the license with steady hands, her fingers brushing the edge of the card just long enough to feel its familiarity, its grounding presence. She nodded once, not in submission, not in victory, just acknowledgement. The second officer stepped back slightly, creating space that had not been there earlier, his gaze moving briefly to the child, then away, as if recognizing something he had missed before. Danielle turned toward her son, her expression softening immediately. "Come here, baby," she said, gently, and he moved toward her without hesitation, his small hand slipping into hers. Warm, steady, she knelt slightly, just enough to meet his eyes, her voice low and calm. "We are going home," she said, and this time the words carried certainty that the night had not allowed before. He nodded, trusting her completely, because he always had. The man stood a few feet away, his posture unchanged, his presence still and grounded. He did not speak again, did not step forward, because nothing more needed to be said. Danielle glanced toward him once, a brief look, but full of meaning, gratitude without words, understanding without explanation. He gave a small nod in return, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough. The officers returned to their cruiser, movements quieter now, less rigid, the red and blue lights still flashing, but somehow softer, less intrusive, as if the energy behind them had shifted. The streets slowly exhaled, porch lights dimming one by one, silhouettes fading back into the privacy of their homes. The moment releasing its hold on the night, Danielle guided her son back into the car, helping him into his seat, adjusting his hoodie gently, her hands careful, present. She closed the door softly, then walked around to the driver's side, each step steady, unhurried. She paused for a second before getting in, looking down the street where the headlights had first appeared, now just another part of the dark. Then she got into the car. The engine started with a quiet hum, familiar, grounding. She pulled away slowly, not rushing, not lingering, just moving forward. The man watched for a moment longer, then turned back toward his own vehicle, his steps as measured as when he arrived. The street returned to its quiet rhythm. The only sound, the distant fading of an engine and the soft whisper of wind moving through the trees. And in that quiet, nothing dramatic remained. No raised voices, no final declarations. Just the absence of tension, the presence of something restored, dignity, calm, the simple right to be seen as human. And as the night settled back into itself, it carried that truth quietly, without announcement, but impossible to ignore.